social programs for sex offenders is dismal. So there is really no good way of effecting a cure and putting these people back in positions where they have access to children. Another mistake that people make is that if you know something about certain behavior, you're not allowed to talk about it, because there is a prohibition in the Torah, very serious, what we call lashon hara. Either talk, forbidden talk, you're not allowed to say anything derogatory about another Jew, so that puts a chilling effect on all conversation about the matter. It is completely not true, because there are circumstances that are well described in Halacha when you are allowed to speak derogatorily about others. A whole class called Kohelas, where there is clear purpose and need of the listener finding out about it. And that covers a lot of this as well. There's a final, two more. One is that there's an obligation in the Torah to judge favorably. So when you hear stories, like, you really can never assume that the person's really guilty, because maybe there's some kind of explanation. Basically, that's also a misreading of the law. There is an obligation in Halacha of judging somebody favorably when you know the person. When you know the person to be upstanding. And there are two ways of judging the same kind of behavior. When you don't know the person, it's considered a good trait to try to find ways of explaining things, this way, that way, but certainly no obligation. But more important than that, Halacha does not demand that people judge favorably when judging favorably is going to lead to further damage. It's as simple as that. The Talmud says in few places, al-tihi tzadik harbe. Don't be too righteous. Sometimes when you're too righteous, you wind up causing more harm than good. The Gemara tells us that Gedaliah, the governor of the Jewish community in Israel after the destruction of the first temple, and still had a certain amount of self-autonomy, decided he was going to be very observant about the laws of receiving lashon hara, and he didn't want to listen to reports that somebody was coming to kill him. It cost him his life, and it cost the life of the entire community, because the Babylonian rulers were so disturbed by the assassination that they basically stripped the community of all of its self-rule. There is no obligation to throw discretion to the winds in the name of judging favorably. That said, let me tell you clearly and unequivocally what is supposed to happen when there are credible reports of abuse going on in the community. The first and only consideration is protecting any victims. The first and only consideration is protecting victims. It's the way, and almost always is, the best way of doing that is going to civil authorities, then you go to civil authorities. This has been repeated again and again and again. I don't know why it comes as such a surprise to so many people. The only reason it does is because they haven't really looked into some of these areas of Jewish law. But that is the bottom line. So please don't misquote or distort anything that I am about to tell you from here on in. What I am going to do from here on in does not take away from that conclusion that this is the way you're supposed to go. However, if all you did was absorb what I said up until now, there would be room for lots of mistakes on a theoretical basis for the most part, in some cases practical as well. I am going now to the realm of mostly the theoretical to talk about how some of the articles that you read out there are, in my opinion, ill-informed, inaccurate, sometimes blur in crucial distinctions in halacha, I don't blame the authors for doing it and their enthusiasm to spread their message of the urgency of the matter. They may make mistakes at times, but that's what Jewish law is all about. And we have times that don't talk about the theoretical. You do, and I think that there are important lessons in this, and it's an interesting topic, and you might as well be better informed. But understand that nothing that I say takes away or diminishes from the fact that 99% of the time, the reaction is still going to be, if you know of any abuse out there, what you do is take care of the victim and potential victims. The community here learned the hard way. I mean, I hope they learned. I think they certainly learned. Whether they learned enough, I don't know. There was a case, people will talk about it, not of child abuse, but of marital abuse. Probably about 10 years ago, there was a couple living on my side of town. The woman was observant, her husband was not. She was beaten by her husband, ran, came back, the usual syndrome, stayed too long, came back, forgave him every time, and the last time was one time too late. She was murdered by her husband. The kids were then adopted by other people in the community, and there was a lot of guilt feelings going around. It's one of these things, like, if only I would have thought, if only I would have known, if only I was attacked earlier, like, why didn't we intervene? But it made a deep impression upon people. Still, that doesn't mean that every time there's a rumor, or there's some innuendo, or there's some accusation, that you judge everything to be a matter of life and death. And that the first thing that you do is you find how this guy is and pump a couple of bullets into his head. That's not a proper reaction. I will try to offer some nuance. First of all, abuse, like everything else, is a continuum. Not everything is abuse. I used to joke about this, but I have heard that there are actually kids who have called the authorities sometimes and talked about how their parents are abusing them. How are they abusing them? Wouldn't give them the keys to the car. Psychological trauma. You know, I used to say this is a joke, but it's become a reality. We live in a very litigious society. We live in a society in which you can make a lot of mistakes. I don't mean to trivialize. I just mean that if you now open your mind to understand different kinds of accusations of abuse, they're not always of the same seriousness. There are parents around I'm not talking now about the legality or whether this should be done or shouldn't be done. I happen to be one of those parents who does not want to see any corporal punishment in schools that my kids are in. There are parents who are of a very different mind. That for hundreds of years, verbatim, particularly in elementary school, were allowed to use mild corporal punishment. If your child is in such a school, and they do it, I don't know if any schools still allow it, you'll have parents who get upset about the particular application. Their kid got whacked one day for talking out of turn or whatever, and they'll come and I'll bring in the authorities and I'll sue and everything. Look, a kid getting whacked once on the rump is not going to lead to long-term psychological damage. It may be the wrong thing, and maybe the teacher should be stopped, but it's not on the same level of seriousness as a child who's groped in the bathroom. It's just not. So there has to be nuance. Now, the argument about Messira, that you can, no problem, in handing people over to the secular authorities, you'll find in the literature out there that there are people who write that as long as the guilty party has done something which is considered to be forbidden by Jewish law, even if the secular authorities use a more severe form of punishment, let's say incarceration, which generally does not exist in Jewish law. We don't have prisons for the most part in Jewish law. So some guy will be up for a jail sentence, or somebody will argue that it's Messira because by handing over a person or informing on a certain person, he's up for 10 years on a charge, he'll serve 5 and then in jail, and